We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bring news just for you. It's Monday, August 5th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and this is News Generation. Today, we're joined by Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And Cheska Dainho.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, as usual, we're going to start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending online. Starting August 15th, Korean Air, South Korea's flag carrier, will no longer offer 신라면 instant cup noodles to economy class passengers. This decision is part of new safety measures in response to increased turbulence, aiming at preventing burn accidents. Instead, the airline will provide sandwiches, corn dogs, and hot pockets as alternative snack options. Moving on, the perfect companion to ramen noodles is kimchi. South Korea's kimchi export volume reached a record high in the first half of this year. According to the Korea Customs Service, 23,900 tons of kimchi were shipped overseas, up 4.8% from the same period last year. Exports to the West saw a significant increase, with a 20% rise in the US and a 34% jump in the Netherlands. Industry insiders attribute this growth to a rising interest in the food, fueled by the popularity of Korean content and Korean food. Finally, Korea faced extreme temperatures over the weekend. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, most areas experienced feels like temperatures of 35 degrees Celsius or higher. In Cheomdongmyeon of Yeoju City, Gyeonggi-do Province, the daytime high temperature even reached 40 degrees Celsius on Sunday, marking the first time in 6 years that such a high has been recorded. Meanwhile, Gangneung City in Gangwon-do Province set a new record for the longest stretch of tropical nights, with 17 consecutive days as of Monday. Now, a tropical night is defined as when the temperature remains at or above 25 degrees Celsius from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. the next morning. Now, unfortunately, there's no end in sight for the scorching heat, as the KMA has forecast that this heat wave will continue for quite a while, right?
Yeah, which is very unfortunate because I think all of us and probably people watching it do want it to end. However, even the officials are saying we no longer have a global warming, but we are entering the global boiling phase. And this is quite, in distraught because, as we all know, this is a cycle because as it gets hotter, people use more cars, they want to stay more indoors, using more electricity and AC. So I am really, really scared about how this is going to unfold. And also another thing is, because it's turning into more tropical heat, whereas increasing humidity and heat sort of combined together, I think there are some also health-related issues and death that are happening right now.
Right, and talking about these health consequences brought up by the extreme heat, the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency reported that 3 people are presumed to have died from heat-related illnesses on Saturday alone, and additionally nearly 400 heat-related illness cases were reported just last week. So Walter, what are some effective ways for our viewers to kind of implement so that they can protect themselves from the heat or these heat-related illnesses?
Right, so the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency advises avoiding outdoor activities during obviously the hot hours. They are usually from 11 o'clock to about 2 o'clock. Now, it also recommends using cooling devices such as portable fans or taking refuge in cooler sheltered areas, wearing loose or light colored clothing rather than your black clothing, and using hats and umbrellas when going out to prevent heat-related illnesses. Now, it is also important to stay hydrated regularly, even if you don't feel thirsty at all.
Right, so do keep these tips in mind and hope that we can prevent and see no more heat-related illnesses here in the country or around the world. And that was our news feed for this Monday. So we're now going to move on to our main discussion of the day by taking a look at the screen.
Have you ever considered what your final moments might be like? Traditionally, living a long life was often seen as the ultimate goal. However, there is a noticeable shift, particularly among the younger generation, towards valuing a good death or the idea of dying well. This shift even includes considering options like assisted suicide.
Right, so the reason we're discussing this particular topic today is the news that a suicide pod could start being used in Switzerland within this year. So, Walter, could you tell us more about this suicide pod, because it's a really new concept, right?
Yeah, so the sarco pod or capsule first developed in 2019. Now, the method of using this capsule is actually very simple. Now, after being evaluated, according to medical, mental, and legal requirements, the person who wishes to die by assisted suicide, or we'll talk about the difference between euthanasia later, will enter the capsule where the lid is then closed and the amount of oxygen is slowly decreased within the capsule. Now it goes from 21% oxygen to just 0.05 in 30 seconds. So it is also said to be quite affordable for people who wish to die this way as well. So I don't know if this is a good or bad thing.
Right, and to add more detail, this pod was created by an Australian actually, but I want to ask you, Cheska, why is this pod said to be used in Switzerland, which is a completely different country, and what is the public opinion regarding this pod in Switzerland?
Yeah, first off, Switzerland does allow for assisted suicide under very specific conditions. And I did some research, and it's different from euthanasia in that the person that is receiving the assisted suicide, one, must be an adult, and two, must be able to administer drug himself or herself. And there's a quote also in there that says, "It should never be for selfish or monetary gain," and quote, "suffering either from an incurable disease or be plagued with unbearable suffering," including there are some age limitations in that as well. So I think on top of that, I think one of the issue that they had is not just the ethical, but also some of the medical intervention that was lacking from the using of the sarco capsule. Meaning, I think based on the research that I did, the person that is receiving the sarco capsule treatment only needs a psychiatric report in order to be able to be in the capsule. And that means the nitrogen itself doesn't need any medical prescription. So the only way that you can actually use the sarco capsule is based on a psychiatric report, and no medical assistant is required, which can be dangerous for certain instances.
Right, so definitely a lot of things to think about regarding the actual usage of this capsule. Now, to explore the legal implications of this pod and its usage further, we'll first invite a lawyer to our talks right after this break. Right, so today we're joined by Yoon Seok-jun, who's working as a lawyer in Korea. Welcome, Seok-jun, to the show.
Good morning, thank you.
Good morning, thanks for joining us. So our first question for you today is, recently, as we've mentioned before, there's been a lot of talk about the so-called suicide pod expected to be used in Switzerland later this year. So does this machine actually comply with Swiss laws?
Yeah, while homicide at the request of the victim is prohibited and punished under the Swiss Criminal Code, assisted suicide without selfish motives is not. Article 114 of the Swiss Criminal Code states that any person who for commendable motives, and in particular out of compassion for the victim, causes the death of a person at that person's own genuine and insistent request, still shall be liable to a custodial sentence. In contrast, for inciting or assisting suicide, Article 115 provides that any person who, for selfish motives, incites or assists another to commit or attempt to commit suicide shall be liable to a custodial sentence or a monetary penalty. This means that if the death is self-administered, i.e. a suicide, and the assistance provided for administering the suicide is not for selfish motives, it is not a crime. For this, doctors involved in an assisted suicide process will have to check if the patient is capable of making the serious judgment and the desire is well considered and permanent. The sarco suicide pod, as discussed, is understood to be free of charge for its use, except for the small price for nitrogen, and therefore it may be difficult to find a selfish motive in assisting suicide with that device. That said, of course, it remains to be seen how this will be legally tested in the Swiss courts. Actually, there have been at least a couple of cantons which denounce the use of the device for various reasons, including the non-involvement of doctors in the process.
Right, so this naturally brings us to the broader topic of assisted suicide. It's legally permitted in Switzerland, but what about in Korea, and how does Korea approach this sensitive issue?
Under Korean law, all forms of euthanasia and assisted suicide had been prohibited, be it via stopping further treatment of illnesses, actively administering and cause death by request, or purely assisting suicide. So under Article 252 of the Korean Criminal Code, a person who kills another upon one's request or with one's consent shall be punished by imprisonment. And also this provision apply to a person who instigates or aids and abets another to commit suicide. However, in 2009, the Supreme Court allowed stopping futile life-sustaining treatments for terminally ill patients who are beyond any reasonable chance of recovery. Through this Supreme Court judgment, an elderly woman who had been in a persistent vegetative state was permitted the assistance of medical professionals to remove the life-sustaining ventilator per her wishes stated previously in her conscious state and at the request of her family. In 2016, a statute was enacted to regulate the situation dealt in that Supreme Court decision further in detail. So the Act on Decisions on Life-Sustaining Treatment, Article 15, states a doctor in charge may implement a determination to terminate life-sustaining treatment if his or her patients at the end of life is deemed to have made a determination through an advance statement on life-sustaining treatment.
So here's a hypothetical scenario. Given the Korean law that we have, if a Korean national were to travel to Switzerland to use the suicide pod, what would be the legal ramification or the jurisdiction that would apply in this case?
So in principle, the Korean Criminal Code is applicable to South Korean nationals and foreigners who commit crimes within the territory of Korea. It, however, also applies to foreign persons who commit crimes against Korean nationals outside Korea, unless the act is allowed in that country. So basically, in theory, it is applicable to any Swiss national who assist a Korean national committing suicide in Switzerland, unless it is allowed under the Swiss law. The act of suicide itself is not what is legally prohibited in Korea or practically punishable because that people will have been already dead. Rather, we need to assess the legality of the assistance that occurred in the process. While the legality of the use of the sarco pad in Switzerland itself is still up for debate, assuming that its use has been found legal in Switzerland, a foreign organization providing the sarco pad to assist Korean nationals committing suicide in Switzerland probably cannot be held criminally liable under Korean law. And the act of assisted suicide was not, as the act of assisted suicide was not legally prohibited in Switzerland.
I see. All right. Thank you, Seokjin, for your valuable insights today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as we're talking about the broader topic of assisted death, we also asked our viewers whether assisted death is legal in their countries and what they think about it. And here's what 3 of them said. If we look at the comments, Chip says in Canada it is legal, but it is strictly regulated. Medical assistance in dying requires a person to meet certain criteria and go through several layers of assessments and safeguard applications. Leon says euthanasia is illegal in Singapore. Those in favor of euthanasia often argue for individual autonomy and the right to choose the end of one's life. Those against euthanasia argue that life is sacred and should be preserved and that there might be potential for abuse or exploitation. Docky says it's legal here, but only in cases where multiple professionals have given the green light and the patient is able to give consent. For psychological reasons, euthanasia is also allowed here. I live in the Netherlands, so it is the most liberal and extreme version of euthanasia, I think, in the world. So after looking at our comments and through our discussion, some of our viewers might wonder what's the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide. So to give you a brief clarification, euthanasia involves deliberately ending someone's life to relieve suffering, typically through administering a lethal substance to that person. But on the other hand, assisted suicide involves providing the means for a person to end their own life. For example, the sarco pod that we mentioned in our discussion. And as our interviewee mentioned, even though euthanasia and assisted assisted suicide are both illegal in Korea, it seems like the general public is having a more positive viewpoint towards euthanasia or assisted suicide, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So if we actually take a look at the screen, I can show you just how our nation is looking at it at the moment. Now, Seoul National University Hospital conducted a survey of over 1,000 adults to see their opinion on whether we should legalize euthanasia, or in this case, I guess the sarco pod. Remarkably, 62% strongly agree with the legalization of it. To me, though, I personally agree with this legalizing it, but it is sad coming from a country that has the highest suicide rate amongst the OECD countries. It really tells you what the mindset of Korean society is at the moment. But on the other end of this scale, only 2% strongly disagree with this.
It's quite interesting that more than half of the general public who were surveyed here in South Korea were actually for euthanasia. Now, Cheska, I want to ask you, why do you think this is? And it seems that the younger generation these days are becoming more open to these assisted dying methods, right?
I think there are multiple layers to it, and I was quite surprised by the figures that Walter represented, but I think one of the main reasons is, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience because I think death is something that is very personal and private, but I think our generation has taken the stance towards death in terms of trying to find dignity and meaning in it rather than being, having it something that comes at them. So being more proactive about learning or being educated about it. To speak from my own experience, I actually even attended a well-dying program in which I went and even wrote my own will, took a photo, and went through the whole funeral proceeding and even lay in the coffin to really think about what it meant to actually die. Because I think life is as much valuable as death is lingering. So I think that is one of the stance that a lot of our generation is taking, in that they want to be a bit more proactive, they want to be more informed and trying to find dignity in dying so that it doesn't scare us too much.
Right, and let's talk a bit more about what our panelists think. So I'll give you like a hypothetical situation.
Okay.
Imagine that a loved one who's struggling with a severe illness or disability expresses a desire to go to Switzerland for assisted suicide because assisted suicide is legal in Switzerland. So how would you react in this situation?
Of course, this is a painful thing to watch as an onlooker rather than be the person who wants to take their own life. Now, it would be extremely difficult for me to even imagine, but it would depend on the condition of the loved one. Now, if the loved one has a terminal illness and is in severe pain, I would somewhat understand, though it wouldn't make it easier for me or anyone around me. However, it would be hypocritical of me for me to say I wouldn't allow it, because I think that these kinds of treatments can help people be more at peace sooner. So though it would break my heart to see any of my family members do this, I can't stop them from doing it if they are really sure that they want to do it.
I see. So what are your thoughts on this, Cheska?
My heart breaks a little even just thinking about it. There's like a heavy set of feelings. But I think I would also try to be supportive, because the definition of being the loved one is to be on their side, even if you might not agree on certain things. And especially when it comes to something as private as death, even though I love them, it is their own very personal experience, so I would have to respect it as much as I can. And I think one of the thing about the assisted suicide, or the topic that we have, is to give dignity in death. And if they want that, and if they do think they deserve it, then I would have to be there for them and then support them in any ways that I can.
I think I'm also on the same page with you guys. I would definitely respect the decision that's made by my loved one, whether that'll be my family or my significant other. Now, at the end of the day, wrapping up our discussion, it's crucial to consider why more people might be open to assisted suicide or euthanasia than compared to the past. For some, it's actually a matter of escaping unbearable physical or mental pain, but for others, actually addressing underlying issues they're facing in their lives might restore their will to live, because a lot of people, some people who are for euthanasia, they kind of say they should be given that choice because they're kind of tired of life. So what do you think?
Yeah, there's a fine line between the two options you have just given. However, I'm hoping that if this becomes a global situation, that there is extremely strict legislation in place to be able to do this. As we talked about in the viewer comments, that they were saying that this could be exploited or abused. I mean, we could see this somewhat in the black market in one day, who knows? This is not going to just to anyone though. This is only for the terminally ill. It shouldn't be for exploitative reasons. And though miracles do happen sometimes where people do, sometimes not die from terminal illnesses, we mustn't ignore the needs of the people who are facing these serious situations. Some will also choose to live until they, the end of their sickness as well.
Right.
But we must not forget that at the end of the day, it's their personal choice.
Right, so respecting their individual choices. Now, what about you?
I really think that's a great statement, and this is something that should be viewed, I think, in a multidimensional lens. Meaning, I don't think just because we have assisted suicide, it means the public wants to give up or wants to give up easily. I think it could also be interpreted as people really, really want to value the living and have a dignified ending. Meaning that, as we talked about, life has meaning because there's an ending, right?
Right.
So by the fact that we have these people that are more pro when it comes to assisted suicide, could also be interpreted as people really want to find quality of meaning and increase dignity when it comes to death, and it's something that they just don't want to be scared of. So in that sense, I think this is something that warrants a lot more discussion, as
Right.
Walter says, with a lot of conditions, legality, and of course discussions like these we have on News Generation.
Right, and we'll bring more relevant discussions in the future for you guys. Now, that's all from us today, but NewsGen will be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks today to Walter Lee
Lovely to be here.
and Chesta Gainho.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.